first edition of the Naharji, the Bookathon presented in association with the Raisoni Foundation. In this session, we shall explore the book Puffin Classics Timeless Tales from Marwar by Vishesh Kothari. This book is a translation of folk tales originally penned down by Padma Shri Vijayadan Detha. For centuries, Rajasthan has been a gold mine of oral traditions and histories, with Padma Shri Vijayadan Detha being one of the foremost storytellers of all time. Timeless Tales from Marwar gives a new lease of life to his folk tales. It is a handpicked compilation from the much celebrated Batandi Fulbari Garden of Tales, a 14-volume collection written over a span of nearly 50 years. Retold in Detha's magical narrative style, complete with imagery, this selection offers some of the oldest and most popular fables from the Thar Desert region. It has tales of handsome Rajkuwars, evil witches, exploitative Thakurs, miserly saints, clever insects, benevolent snakes, and much more. Vishesh Kothari's vivid English translation introduces one of the most venerated figures in Rajasthani folk culture to a wider audience. Our speaker for this session is Mr. Vishesh Kothari himself. A financial consultant by profession, Vishesh Kothari has a keen interest in the oral and musical traditions of Rajasthan. He completed his masters in mathematics from the University of Cambridge, prior to which he studied at St. Stephen's College in Delhi and King's College in London. He has been associated with the UNESCO Sahapedia on projects focused on the musical traditions of women in Rajasthan and as a language expert with the Jaipur Virasat Foundation. This session will be moderated by Mr. Vishal Jain. He is a management graduate and a certified trainer for exams like IELTS by the British Council and for TOEFL by ETS. Having experience of sending students to various countries, he specializes in researching about various universities and courses offered to them across the globe. With over 18 years of experience, he has counseled hundreds of students and helped them achieve their goals by studying abroad. Now, I'd like to hand over the session to our moderator.
Vishesh ji is a person for whom you, whatever introduction will give, definitely less and the thing what he's doing for not only himself but for the literature and for the tradition of India. So fortunate enough to talk to Vishesh Kothari ji today. Definitely, when I got to know that I'll be interacting with such an eminent personality himself today, I was definitely a bit nervous because a lot of things are similar. One thing that both of us, or I should say the ancestors, belong to Rajasthan. Both of us are Jain. And I got an opportunity to speak to him about the very old Rajasthani language, the Marwari language. And thing is, why he has got it translated and why he feels that this is a necessity today. A lot of queries and questions about his book and about the things what he has done for the language. So, Vishesh ji, it's a pleasure, Vishesh ji, to talk to you today. And Vishesh ji, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's a pleasure, to be associated with you today here and speaking to you like. In my profile, the profession I'm into, I send students overseas for their studies and other things. And the moment I got to know about your profile, your educational background and everything, I was like amazed. And then when I got to speak to you, I was like, how can a person of your calibers be so down to earth, so attached to the literature and the tradition of India, our own very thing? And rightly said by you in a brief discussion, what we had, that we are somewhere losing the things which probably must have motivated you to translate the tales of Rajasthan, especially I would say, into English language, which is a major language. Even today, normal day-to-day household language has become English largely, I believe. So, sir, what was your inspiration initially, to when you have studied overseas, you have been for so many years out of India, you are into academics. What actually brought you towards literature?
So a couple of things, or rather combination of a few things, Vishalji. The first thing is the realization that oral traditions are usually very fragile, right? They survive only on different generations continuing to have conversations with one another. And I realized that stories which I had heard while I was growing up are no longer being told to my younger cousins. Even within the family, I saw a marked change, which has come about, say, in the last 25, 30 years. Um, so there is a sense of loss which was there, that you suddenly realize that lots of things are not going to survive maybe another 10, 20, 30 years if someone does not preserve them. The second thing, of course, was the realization that these works are really invaluable. They're not just valuable because they are folk stories, but they're also valuable from a literary point of view. They represent different ways of thinking, different kinds of stories based in different settings. And that was another point of importance. The third thing, of course, was to be able to bring this literature into English. Almost felt like a responsibility to me because so little of it is available. Biji wrote about 800 stories in his lifetime, and I think maybe under 30 or 40 are available in translation in English. So it felt very important to be able to bring it out and bring it to a broader audience of readers. And so that people there is a increased awareness not only of the rich literary tradition but also of the language in which this literary tradition survives. So those were some of the motivations which were there behind getting down to this task of translation.
Right. Uh, that was the initial things, but when you decided to translate the book,
Mhm.
there must be, I'm sure, there must be a lot of laureates who must have written the traditional tales in Marwari language. Well, what actually took you only towards this particular author to translate, for your first book?
Right. So there are some reasons why Vijayan Dita is particularly special. Number one, he's definitely one of the best. Probably, I would venture to say the best known contemporary Rajasthani author who's writing prose in the 20th century. Number one is that. Number two is that his stories are not just literature, but they represent literature, or they represent the voices of the common people. Because it was a project of nearly 50 years where he would go around his village asking people for stories. And the minute he would find enough stories to publish a book, he would have a book which would come out. So they represent voices and traditions that have come back for hundreds of years. Some stories we have evidence that they've been around since the 12th century, 13th century. Other stories are, I mean, each story. I mean, if you see, Vijayandita's notes and archives. For example, some story he heard in 1960 from a grandmother in his family. Now, if you think of a lady who's a grandmother in 1960s, perhaps she would be 70 years old, 80 years old, and she heard it in her childhood. So she's sitting in 1890 or 1880, hearing a story in her childhood from her grandmother. So straight away, we are looking at a story which was first told maybe 200 years back in 1820. Maybe the grandmother's grandmother heard the story as her child from her grandmother, and she told it to her granddaughter in 1880, and Vijayandita hears it later, 80 years later in 1960. So, and here we are sitting in 2020 hearing these stories. So it's astounding that by tapping into these voices, you are tapping into a continuous tradition which goes back, you know, hundreds of years, if not more. So these traditions felt very special. They felt very personal at the same time because some of these stories I had heard as a child while I was growing up. Some stories which I had not heard, but the characters, the settings, the villages, the cultural context are very familiar to me. They felt like they were my own. So these are the reasons why it felt like there was no other option but then to turn to Viji, which is how Vijayandita is fondly known as in Rajasthan. And it felt like he was the obvious choice to begin translating, to begin this journey of translation.
Shishji, you have just brought in the first edition of out of the 14 volumes of the stories what he has written. There is only this first volume of yours. Do you plan to bring more such translated versions? I mean,
So I
copies of
have
such volumes.
some of the books here to show you. So these are what the volumes look like. I've got only 3 volumes here. They're actually 14, and that's what they're
14.
called the Batari Fulwadi, and they're written in Rajasthani. There are 14 volumes. The first one I think was published sometime in the 1960s, and the last one I believe came out sometime in 2007. So it's a long journey. I have actually not brought out the first volume in translation. I've selected stories from across all 14 volumes. And there are 17 stories in my book, which is titled Timeless Tales from Marwar. And The book was brought out by Penguin Random House. It came out this January. It was released at the Jaipur Literature Festival, and yeah, I am already working on a part two. I'm working on a second book which will come out with HarperCollins, and that should be out sometime in the middle or latter half of 2021. And that will be, so this one is under the Puffin imprint of Penguin Random House. So Puffin, as you know, is children and young adults imprint. Though our book is not strictly intended to be a children's book, it is suitable for 10 plus and all ages beyond that. However, because children are also supposed to be one of the some of the readers for this book, we were restricted in some of the stories which we could choose, because many stories are very explicit. They're on very explicit themes. Those stories. So the book with HarperCollins will be a full-blown book, suitable, for the adult reader, and that I'm already working on that right now, and that should be out maybe in another 6 months.
Great. So you have selected roughly around, say, 17 tales from these 14 volumes. So I believe on an average, we have just got one from each book, and there are hundreds of others which are still lying digged up into this treasure of the books what you have with you. So
yes, probably there's a lot more.
Certainly, yes, and definitely looking forward to. It becomes easy for people like me who belong to the tradition we're talking about, but has actually forgot. But today morning, Vishesh, just to tell you, I was listening to a conversation by your Honorable Prime Minister, and he was talking about alumni of the universities and how you should be connected, the alumni should be connected, or the institution should be inspiring or to get motivated to get connected to the alumni. And today I feel we are alumni of Rajasthan. We should take initiatives to get connected. Of course, you have done the thing. I would say, you are a person who has taken that initiative, to bring the change in people like me. And believe me, after today's conversation, I am someone who is definitely going to discover a lot about Rajasthan, for sure. But tell me one thing, how do you want people to, people like me who belong to the culture and tradition of Rajasthan, but so what do you say to them, how they should get connected?
Well, I mean, very frankly, I'm no one to really advise or guide people in that sense. But I mean, if there were some suggestions which I had to give, I mean, one thing, of course, is literature like this can be very good way of introducing, say, someone who's a third or fourth generation migrant and has never really been back. Literature of this type is a very good way to introduce people to the culture of a state, because that is one way. However, I think the big learning that one carries from these books is that one doesn't really need to do anything special in the sense of reaching out for some specific book or enrolling for some XYZ course. I think the big realization which one gets is that we have such stories all around us. There are such voices all around us, in our homes, around us, people who work for us. And it doesn't have to be specifically in the homes of people who are diaspora of Rajasthan. It can be homes anywhere. People who work for us, whether it is an elderly ayah who is there at home, or an elderly domestic help, a grandparent, a grand aunt, anyone in the family. I mean, till even very recently, it was very much the norm for children to be told stories, while putting them to bed. Hello, am I audible?
Please.
Yes, it was the norm for people to be told stories while putting them to bed. It was the norm for people, women, to exchange stories, on religious occasions like fasts. They will tell each other kathas and rat kathas. It is the norm for people to go to sermons where there are monks who will use a story to illustrate a particular teaching. So such stories are all around us, and I think if there can be a greater sensitivity towards such voices, where we begin to listen to them a little bit more, and we regard their voices as literature, as potential stories. I think that in itself is a big thing, and you can be based anywhere. We all have people around us who are capable of telling such stories, who know many such stories. I'm always every now and then I'm in this book, I'm reading out some story, or I'm mentioning the storyline of a particular tale, and someone or the other says that, of course, this story is a very common story. I heard it from the nanny who brought me up, or I heard it from a grand aunt, or I heard it from in XYZ place. They use this story as a saying. So I'm always surprised how many stories are just lurking all around us. So I feel if just one, I feel the first thing possible is to just become sensitive to these voices, to these stories, to these traditions, to just be stories. It can be folk songs, it can be literature, it can be sayings, it can be people's personal life experiences. Also, I mean that is also in some sense personal biographies are also equal to understand that where our family come from, whether it is people who were affected by partition and their stories, how was the experience for them, or people who are migrating back in the 30s and 40s, what migration meant for them. Keep us in touch, in so many ways by just getting in touch with these voices around us. So that would be my. So I was just saying that. I was just saying that if there was a starting point, I would say that people start by becoming sensitive to these voices and songs and personal incidents and biographies which are there all around us. So that was the last point which I was talking.
Thank you so much. That was definitely, inspiring and definitely motivating as well, to go and get connected to the culture. But talking about your book again, Vishesh, it's like, I'm sure, there must be something which inspired you, so is there any particular story in these tales, which is a real inspiration for you? Every one of us do get inspired by these kind of stories. So is there any story, or any particular incident,
Yes,
what you would like to share from the book?
there are many such stories which are stories I really enjoy. I mean, actually, well, of course, when you're choosing stories, each story you find it to be enjoyable. That is the only reason you would include it in such a collection. But there are some stories which are particular favorites of mine, and I think uh, you know. Uh, uh, Detha, he writes in his notes, and his notes have also been there are also annotations in the notes, introductions written by Komal Kothari in the original books. I've included little snippets of those notes along with the stories in the book. So if people, they will see that in the book there's a lot of other information about the stories, where the story was heard, who told the story, and so on and so forth. And the stories come in various types. Some stories are the stories which are bedtime tales for children, which were told by grandmothers and mothers while putting children to bed at night. Some stories are religious stories which are used in sermons by monks. When you go for a vyakyan or you go for a pravachan by a particular monk, they will be used a story to illustrate a particular point. Then there are the stories which are told by, they're just purely entertainment stories. It's like they're entertainment, or like masala Bollywood film, which all people of all ages will just sit around and enjoy while passing time. If there's, for example, a performing group which is coming to the village for 2 nights or 3 nights, there will be a narration of the story by night. People will light a fire and sit around and exchange stories. There are stories also which farmers will tell themselves while they have to guard their fields at night from wild animals and thieves, and they tell stories to pass the time. There are stories that women will tell each other on Vrat Kathas, which are the stories of religious significance. Then each community and clan and tribe um, or Adivasi in Rajasthan will also have an origin myth, which are the tales of their origin, which are passed down within their community. Those stories are there. So there are stories of many types, and the storylines are, they are about things which have fascinated man, or have incited or aroused the curiosity of man since primitive times. Since for thousands of years, there are stories about the sun and the moon and the stars, how the stars in the sky came to be, or how a particular constellation in the sky came to be. There are stories of adventure about young children who go to foreign lands. Uh, One person rides on a fish, and he journeys past saat samundar par wo jata hai, and he has an adventure. There are some stories which are very simple, very simple stories about children's stories. Almost meaningless. You will think that it's almost absurd, but they're really entertaining stories. I mean, there's one story in the book which is a huge favorite of mine. It's a small story of 2 pages, and it's about a girl who has a pet Jew, a Jew which stays in the hair. She has a pet Jew. She doesn't have a pet dog or a cat or a cow or a goat. She has a pet Jew, and and this is a story about the girl and a pet Jew. So there are such stories which almost strike you with their simplicity, and every now and then there's something which the story tells you, which almost sweeps you off your feet. You're never prepared for it. Of how simple these stories are, and yet sometimes how they strike you in ways which you don't anticipate. So I mean, yeah, there are many stories which are. There are a few stories which are particular favorites of mine, but there are stories of all types and shapes and colors and all possible variety which I've tried to include in my book.
Great. So this was about your first edition of the translated book. But in the future, because there are so many varieties of things, so do you plan to classify them and come with different categories of books so that different ages can use it or pick it for themselves?
So I mean, this currently the plan is this book by Penguin is specifically designed so that uh, it's actually suitable for all ages, but the content is chosen so that children are also able to read it. It can be prescribed in schools and included in school libraries, and parents can buy it, etc. So there is some caution which was exercised in the choice of stories. Not all types of stories were included or retained. So this specifically for 10 plus, and the HarperCollins book will be specifically targeted at an adult reader. Detha's one of the reasons why Detha's stories and his literature is supposed to be particularly progressive and ahead of his times is that he uses these very old stories to touch upon very modern themes, whether it is questioning power, whether it is homosexuality, whether it is women, whether it is questioning patriarchy. He uses these stories in ways where he's constantly touching on very contemporary issues. Not all issues were regarded as suitable by the editors of the book for suitable for children and suitable for schools. So those have been put into this, those which could not be done, and Detha's all-time classics are now being. I'm now including them in the HarperCollins book. It's tentatively titled "The Best of Vijayam Detha." So we will be including his choicest stories, which are not already there in the Penguin book, and they will be featuring in this book. But that is the basic plan as of now. I don't have any roadmap of a third book at present. I'm just currently focusing on the second book for now. I'll tell you what I read, what Biji writes about. I never met Biji during his lifetime. He passed away in 2013, but I was never not fortunate enough to meet him his lifetime. And he writes that in 1959, in 1959, he was contemplating. Um, so he had this huge angst. Actually, he was very inspired by the Bengali authors Rabindranath Tagore and Sarath Chatterjee were his two heroes, and he was also inspired by the Russian authors of the 19th century, Dostoevsky, Anton Chekhov. He regards as a hero. He realized that people, when one writes in their mother tongue, their expression is where it is that is where one's truest expression arises in one's mother tongue. And he also had this fire in him that he said that Hindi is being imposed on Rajasthan and we are not being allowed to write in Rajasthani. So he decided that if he was to write, he would write only in Rajasthani. So from 1959 onwards, he decided that he would do his primary literary output would be in Rajasthani. And at that point of time, he was advised by Govardhan Lalji Kabra, who was a very famous person from Jodhpur. And he was advised that if you want to indeed write in Rajasthani, it's like suicide. There is no market, there are no journals, there is no recognition. The language is not being taught in schools, and so on and so forth. But if you do want to write in Rajasthani, leave the city and go back to your village, and there chronicle the voices of people. The stories, the sayings, the songs, which live purely in the memories and hearts of people. Because if they've lived for thousands of years, chances are that they are relevant, right? They've remained relevant to generation after generation for thousands of years. So chances are they will continue to remain relevant. And he said that such sayings and songs and stories are to be found in particular, this treasure is to be found in particular quantity, in ample quantity, in the minds and hearts and voices of women. And he said, so make them your gurus, leave the city, go back to your village, make these rural people, these common people, agricultural laborers, granddaunts in your family, anyone passing through your village, an odd monk who has a story to tell you, make them your gurus, look to them for literary inspiration. And that's how his journey started. he began collecting these stories from anyone he could find. And he didn't just write them out, he didn't just transcribe them, he retold the stories in his own ways. Because when a story is told in an oral form versus when it is written down, the story needs to be, the style of writing has to be appropriately chosen. It's not as simple as just writing out what you hear. Because when a story is told, it is an interactive process. The listener also gets involved. The listener says yes and no, and the listener is nodding, and listener can ask a question. But when you are writing, the style has to be completely changed. And Data also twisted the stories around. If you look at the story Paheli, if you remember the movie Paheli, which was a movie which was based on a story by Vijayant Detha, which is called Duvidha. If you see the story Paheli, it's a very simple folk tale, right? A woman's husband goes away to work, and a ghost takes the form of her husband and comes to live with her, right? Everyone is familiar with the story Paheli. And in Paheli, the way he tells the story, the genius of Detha is in the way he tells the story, that by the end of it, the villain of the story or the anti-hero in the story, who is the ghost, your sympathies begin to lie with the ghost. You almost want that Amitabh Bachchan, who's the shepherd or the Gadaria, he's not able to catch the ghost, because you begin to sympathize with the ghost, and you begin to sympathize with this woman who's sitting in alone for 10 years or 12 years. The husband has gone away to a distant land, abandoned her on the very night of her wedding. She has unfulfilled youth and unfulfilled desire in her, and you begin to sympathize with her. Now, this kind of writing, where you are led through the thought process of a woman, where a woman, you are thinking about the desire of a woman for her newly married husband, her sexuality, etc. This type of writing is very unusual. You never really are told about women. You always hear about women through the voices of men. So hearing about women in the first person, this kind of twist, this is where the genius of Detha lies. So I think this is where his triumph is, where he uses these traditional stories and he retells them in forms which are so modern, contemporary, refreshing. At the same time, they're connected to this long tradition which has been around for hundreds of years. So I think that is what is his, that is what his USP is. This has USP, and that is what is the heart of Batari Fulbari.
What is your favorite thing or tradition in the Marwari culture? That's a difficult question to ask.
Well, I mean, favorite thing, I think every culture has its own flavor, it has its own texture, it has its own sayings, its own old traditions. I'm sure every tradition has its own richness. For me, of course, this was special because this is what I have been familiar with. This is what I was born and brought up in. This is what brings back nostalgia for me. This is the language I have heard stories in. This has been my mother tongue. So I think there's nothing which makes Rajasthani. I mean, every culture has its own flavor and its own relevance. To people, for me, its relevance is because it's my mother tongue, and so that is what drew me to it. That this project, that I should translate it, and hopefully this will bring about this will allow more people to read it and be connected with it, and that was my motivation.
To get back to your translations and the books, what you definitely plan to come up in the near future, do you think that these kind of fairy tales, what are meant for kids, for youngsters, for elder generations as well, can possibility of coming up even with an animation series for kids, something of that kind? Because during this lockdown which happened, we got closely connected with the stories from ancient Tenali Ramana.
Right.
So there's a big series of television, episodes. So do you think, along with the books, getting into the digital thing can also help getting people more connected, especially the kids, because nowadays everyone is on mobiles, laptops, and everything else. So, do you think that would also help in case if there is a possibility?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it that the digital medium. So the first thing which is catching on are audiobooks. And audiobooks are not just people reading out books, but they are people enacting out books in audio form. So there's background music and different voices, etc., which is catching on. And there was some conversation about the possibility of converting this into an audiobook. and the various platforms, even Audible by Amazon is catching on in a big way. Storytel is catching on. There were also some conversations on possible animations. Nothing specifically is worked out on this particular book, but it is a very effective medium to reach out to multiply your outreach by manifold, because what people see, seeing somehow is always more effective, or at least it is always particularly effective. Perhaps more even so than reading about it. I don't know about the comparison of the two mediums, but definitely, I mean, having it digitized or having it adapted to a short film or a story. So there is some work going on this already. It is not being done by me, but these are stories. There are other people who are working on converting it into short films. There are also people working on converting it into animation. Um, and I think this is absolutely very important, effective, and there's a lot of scope in this. There's a very small fraction which has been done up until now.
I feel like, we are really so short of time, like 40 minutes. I believe it should have been 4 hours, or maybe like, even extended beyond it. So there are
Right.
so many things I would really. It's because our Rajasthani culture is something which is not only for a few people who belong to the land, but this is something which is global. Every tourist, every international tourist who come to India to visit India cannot go back without visiting Rajasthan. They may miss out Kerala, they may miss out Goa, but they'll surely not miss out Rajasthan. So do you want to make any appeal to the government as well to promote this language, so that you get more encouragement to do these things?
Well, the appeal has been with the government, not made by me, but people have been fighting for it since Viji's time. Since the 1950s and 60s, there has been a significant mobilization of people and petitions to the government to give Rajasthani the status of a constitutional language in the 8th schedule, which will allow Rajasthani to be a valid medium of instruction in the state, and elsewhere people can take the exams in it. It can be a medium of instruction, maybe a second or a third language for people in the state, so that Gram Panchayats and Vidhan Sabhas people can take their oath in Rajasthani in the Vidhan Sabha in Rajasthan. People can there can be jobs for people who speak Rajasthani, whether it is departments in universities and schools, or whether it is in government departments, so on and so forth. So there has been a large scale movement, and there has never been any success to this movement till now. The language still remains recognized by various other agencies in the world. It features on the UNESCO list of languages, etc., etc. But somehow it is not one of the official languages recognized by in the Constitution of India. So that is, I think, the big thing which everyone in Rajasthan has been waiting for, and been praying for, and being agitating for, that that people should have the right to talk in their language, study in their language, disseminate literature in their language, and that is probably the most important barrier which remains to be crossed as of now.
To conclude with this, some few lines from your book, especially there is a question from a viewer, which who would like to know more about that pet Jew. So, but if you want to conclude with something else from your own book, please feel free to do that.
I am just going to bring it up on my screen. Actually, I don't think we have a time for a reading, because a reading would take at least 10-15 minutes. So,
yeah, because I want readers should actually go and read the book, because it's really worth reading and getting connected to the culture and know more stories. But yes, it was more about the questions what I was really curious about. So if you can just to conclude with something from your book, sir, please.
Right. Just a paragraph I think we'll have time for. Actually, I had pulled out a reading, but we don't have time for the full reading. Right. So there is one story which I think is a small story, and that should be doable in 5 minutes. So I'll quickly read this out. This story is called The Leaf and the Pebble. And Biji's quote for the story is that he says, "Because I was so completely unsuccessful with love, I became very talented at writing love stories. Perhaps had I been successful with love, I would have not been so talented with it." The story goes, below a tree lay a pebble, all alone. whom to talk to, whom to speak to. Lying there alone, he got suffocated. As fate would have it, one day a leaf came there, flying from a distance. All of a sudden, the pebble found a chance to talk to someone. He was delighted. He accorded great honor and respect to the leaf who had come to his home. One day, the pebble told the leaf, "My dear friend, please don't go anywhere and leave me alone. I cannot live even a second without you now." "Leave a friend like you and go," replied the leaf. "I'm not that big a fool. But if strong winds blow, how will I stay in one place? I will have to fly with the winds." The pebble thought hard and finally came up with a solution. "Don't you worry about this. I won't let you fly away even if the barb of all storms passes through here. As soon as the winds blow, I will sit on you. Even if gusts of winds blow, I won't let you be blown away with it." "But friend," continued the pebble, "in front of the rain, I am powerless. If it pours, I'll have to melt." It was the leaf this time who thought of a solution. "Don't you worry about this. As soon as it rains, I will cover you. Even the father of all storms won't be able to melt you." And so both friends thought of schemes to save each other. Many a storm blew, but the leaf did not let the leaf, but the pebble did not let the leaf get blown away. Many a time it rained, but the leaf did not let the stone melt. But as fate would have it, one day the storm and the rain came together. All the schemes that the two friends had devised to save each other proved futile. The pebble said, "I'll save you." And the leaf said, "I'll save you." Finally, the pebble spoke up again. "Stupid, how can you save me? You'll be blown away with the first gust of wind, and I'll melt anyway. Now, let's not bother with senseless quarrel. Let me sit on you." And so the leaf had to let the pebble sit on it despite its wish. The pebble positioned itself properly on the leaf. The clouds began to thunder, lightning began to flash, large drops of rain began to fall, gusts of wind began to blow, the pebble began to melt, and went on melting. Till he melted completely, he continued to protect his friend. As soon as the pebble melted completely, a gust of wind came and blew the leaf away. Tears streaming from his eyes, the leaf bid farewell to his friend with a heavy heart. So this is a small story, very tragic love story, if you will, between two friends. A very popular story in Rajasthan to this date, but it's told to children, and that's one reading, a little reading from the book.
Great. Now, because we are talking about Marwari language and Rajasthani language, something you want to conclude in the language itself?
Language? You want me to do a reading in the language?
No, not reading, maybe some concluding words, like, so that we get encouraged towards reading the book, what you have written in Rajasthani or Marwari language. Instead of English.
You want me to conclude in Marwari?
Marwari, yes, please.
You have to give me a moment. I will just have to pull out maybe a portion from the book. There is a very nice story which is there in the book as well, and I have to just I'm just going to search for it. 1 second. So actually, the thing is, this is a long story, and it's there in the book. It's called.
Any stanza in that, or conclusion of that story, or the gist of that story.
Yeah, I can tell you one paragraph, and I think that is a beautiful paragraph. It's about a couple who's childless, and they don't have a child, and they try a lot, but they're not able to conceive, and they get insulted very badly. They're treated as lucky people by everyone around them, but they are the richest people in the kingdom. They're a Seth and a Sethani. And so one day, seeing her husband's pain, the Sethani, he decides that if she cannot conceive a child, she will have to conceive an imaginary child. He will have to deceive and conceive. And this story is about this Sethani who's just had this child of deception. No one, this is a child of deception. She's told everyone that she's had a real child, and no one knows that this is a child of deception. And she's now lost in her thoughts, cradling this baby, which is actually no baby at all. It's just a baby of her dreams. It's a baby of deception. And this is a small paragraph, which I'm going to just quickly read out in Rajasthani, and then if you want, I'll read out the corresponding translation in English.
I think Rajasthani to conclude with would be great.
Right. परण्या पात्या मोट्यार काठी जीवता बेटारो धामलोई मायत छाती माथा कूटता सेवे सेवट आपरा हाताई आपरा आंसू पूछे जाया बेटारे हाथा दाग दे मसान छिप्पगा हाल जब बाप जीव तो घरे पाछो पुगे तो पछे रोना रीकरा ने डपला में की आनी जानी नहीं ए तो सह स्वार्थ रो कुकरो रोड़ो 12 दिनारे उपरांत होळे होळे मते सह बाता रेजले पड़ जावे બોય ખાવનો પીવનો હસનો મુલકનો કમાવનો થૂણનો और સોવનો જાગનો પછી બોરો બો હલીલો और બોરો બો અડખંજો પણ હું ભરમનો ડાવડો મર્યા તો માયતારો ધામલો કદી નહીં મીટે માયતારે મર્યા બાર આંસુ નહીં ખૂટે અને દીકરા રે મર્યા તો માયતાનો બળ્યા પછી ફંદ નહીં કટે ગંગાજીમાં ગાલે બાર ફૂલ બરસાત લગરો है મસાણામાં જુગા જુગા બારી ભસ્મી દાજે તો આપણે બસ ફૂકતા હું ભરમ નિભાવનો ही पड़ेला પણ હું ભરમ હવે ભરમ કઠે રહ્યો वो तो जीवन रो साचेलो मरम है भरम हुए तो बिना कूक फड़े सेठानी ना हाचला पानी कद आवतो सेठ आपरा साथ में मगन और सेठानी आपरा भरम में मगनी सूरज आपरे उगना आतम में मगन हो ऋतु आपरा अपने गेड़ा में मगनी बादला अपनी गाज में अपनी बिजली में बरसना में मगना हरियाली अपनी लील में चांद अपनी चांदनी में अपनी चिजत बदत में मगनी और दुनिया रोमान को आप अपने छाती कूटा में मगन. That's a small paragraph and one of the paragraphs from the book which I most enjoyed translating. And I'm just going to quickly read out the corresponding translated version. So this is about this Sethani who's now sitting and thinking about how she will sustain this lie that she's just told by having this child of deception. And she's thinking to herself, parents bear the death of a young married son by beating their heads and chests. Finally, they wipe their tears with their own hands. When the father heads back home after burning the body of his young son, there is no more meaning to the drama of wailing and howling. That is all but a commotion of selfishness. After 12 days of mourning, things slowly return to normal. Eating, drinking, smiling, laughing, toiling, earning, and waking, sleeping. Everything goes back to where it was, back to the same chores and back to the same chaos. But if this child of deception were to die, then the parents would never stop mourning. Even if the parents died, their tears wouldn't dry up. Their ashes in the Gangaji would weep for years. Their embers in the graveyard would burn for ages and ages. Now, as far as possible, this deception would have to be kept up. But where was this deception a deception anymore? It was the true essence of life. If it was deception, how could the Sethani's breasts fill with milk without her womb conceiving? Now the Seth was engrossed in his truth, and his wife was engrossed in her deception. The sun was engrossed in its rising and setting. The seasons were engrossed in their cycles. The clouds were engrossed in their thunder, lightning, and pouring. Plants in their greenness. The moon in its moonshine and its waxing and its waning. And the human race was engrossed in its toil.
Great.
That is everything.
So much, Visheshji, to give your precious time. We are fortunate in a way that we are not only giving this live to the audience of Nagpur, but also globally as well. So in a way, this is a boon, so that whatever we are speaking can be heard any and everywhere in the world. Thank you so much, Visheshji, for giving us such a beautiful insight towards your book and towards the stories and getting us more closely connected with the culture of Rajasthan, which we are all proud of as Indians, for sure.